Welcome to VaynerX Presents Marketing for the Now. I'm Andrea Sullivan, CMO of VaynerX, and I'm here with Gary Vaynerchuk.
Hi, everybody.
Gary, there's no more summer holidays.
No, there is not.
We are back. We're going to talk about some serious business today. We've got senior execs across almost every single category. If everybody can help us keep the conversation going, hashtag marketing for the now. And for anyone that wants to see recordings of the episode, check out VaynerX.com. Let's go. Our first guest is Victoria Sakal, the Managing Director of Business Intelligence for Morning Consult, a global data intelligence company delivering insights on what people think in real time. Victoria leads the company's brand intelligence research, focusing on the intersection of data with marketing strategy, brand reputation, and consumer trends. Today, she's going to talk about brand love, as she just launched the 2020 Most Loved Brands Report, in addition to doing some earlier research on Gen Z, a topic which is near and dear to Vayner. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you.
Hi, Victoria. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing today?
I'm well. So let's get right into it, create some context building. Actually, before we get into it, I just want to address the audience, especially the one that is very active on Twitter. Use the hashtag marketing for the now. I think I've established this summer that I absolutely engage on Twitter while I'm interviewing our incredible people and use some of the insights and the questions. And I really appreciate when we quote our incredible guests. I think it brings a lot of value to it. So thank you everybody on the Twitter community and obviously everybody watching on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for being here. So Victoria, I think we should set up Morning Consultant just for the individuals that don't know what it is. So maybe 3 or 4 minutes on your origin, what it is, a little bit about yourself. I think we should set that tone first.
Sure. I'll start with a little bit of my background because I think it tees up nicely the real opportunity Morning Consult is going after. I kind of cut my teeth at Kantar for almost 6 years, where I was client facing. Also worked across a number of course, clients, geographies, industries, but thought a bit about the industry and our strategic positioning within that industry as I was kind of exploring new opportunities and thinking what next. Morning Consult crossed my radar because the speed and agility and real hunger that the company brings to, as Andrea said, data insights, but in the sense of, what's going on in real time, how do we get really deep insight, but also across geographies, demographics, psychographics, et cetera. How do we get those into hands of clients without the 2 to 3 week lag time, et cetera? So what we're all about, I focus on the brand vertical. There's also politics. There's also the econ side of things. All of these intersect to the whole ecosystem that brands and businesses operate in. So I, think about brands, but also working across these divisions, thinking about the reality, especially now where all of those things have really come to a head. And thinking about how they intersect and implicate brands and the kind of the role they play in consumer lives.
I love that. Did you, as a kid, were you just curious about these things? Were you anthropologied out? Were you, math out? Or were you in a completely different place? And just out of my own curiosity, how did you kind of stumble into the love around these data points?
Yeah, so my background in college actually brought together some of my love for the math side of things, as well as brands, and the feeling that I had, it's very kind of not brand related, but my mom was a baking business, and I worked at, a hair salon where that was very local, and watching how you treat customers and build a business and create this affinity that people, I didn't know the word affinity, I didn't know, much
Sure.
about brands then, but translating that into kind of, there's data of course around it, but then how do you create a strategy funneled into my college degree, which then has translated to my career experience.
I love it. Let's go into the part that really has me most fascinated, which is this Most Loved Brands of 2020. How long has the organization been doing this? And then how did you go about getting to it? And how do you distribute that information, and what's been the reaction?
Sure thing. So this is the 4th year that we've done this report. So it's evolved kind of methodology-wise over the past couple of years. But just to kind of ground the audience, the components of brand love as we talk about it are favorability, so kind of positive attitude towards the brand, trust, pretty self-explanatory, community impact, so the degree to which brands have a positive impact in the community, and then for a little bit of the loyalty side of things, NPS. And the way, we think about it is it provides kind of a proxy for your progress through a funnel and your relationship with consumers that layers in a little bit more of the predictive emotional side of things. In addition to, you've got your numbers, you've got your financial performance that you can kind of look back on and use that to predict to the future. This year, of course, we had the coronavirus to take into consideration. So we built out the report a bit more to look at not only, point in time brand love, but also pre-pandemic versus now, 2019 versus now, and to understand some of the dimensions of, drivers of brand love, but also how those 4 ingredients have changed or not changed over time, because sometimes those results are just as interesting. To your point about distributing this, I think our clients across industries, as well as, companies big and small, have really found this helpful as you think about what creates stickiness in relationships, and how does that transcend not only the good times, but the bad times? How can the big brands learn from that, but also the younger brands and up and comers use this time when they're maybe acquiring a lot of customers because people don't have other options, or they're discovering them online or whatnot, and build this foundation for retention and, long loving relationships.
Actually, that begs the question, like what impact, now that since you do have 4 years, 3 years prior to this year, how has 2020 reshaped the kind of thinking around love? Like, whether you're using the juxtaposition of prior, the first 3 months of the year, to after, whether there's some sort of, data or overlays of prior years to say, are you ready? Because I know it's early, so I know it's a tough question in some ways, but are you ready to have a working hypothesis, or even maybe some deeper insight to what we're feeling here in the redefinition of expectations and love from brands?
Sure. So there's 2 angles to that. First, I'll speak to the too early to tell side of things, which is when we look at the drivers of brand love, they very much reflect what people have been going through in recent months, as well as some of those things to be true. So reputation and availability probably always matter to people, definitely more so in recent months. How much they'll matter in the months and years ahead, especially when we're hopefully done and clear of a pandemic in particular, jury's still out, especially as things like sustainability and stakeholders start to weigh heavier into the equation. In terms of what we know to be true right now, we see the category representation in our top 50 definitely reflecting, the food and beverage, household product brands that people need now. Of course, those are the ones that they're using more. And this is where you start to get into some of the marketing and kind of brand science around the things that people are using. They're going to build this stronger affinity for, and it kind of fuels this flywheel of love and, recommending to peers or even to your kids, as we're seeing in our Gen Z research, what parents are recommending to kids is sticking. But, kind of beyond that, the last point I'll make is when we look either versus last year to now, or pre-pandemic this year to now, we see that the big brands really have continued to grow bigger. So the bigger, some of the top leading 50 brands that are in the ranking would have been there even if it weren't for a pandemic, which tells you, again, some of these are just, truths around the emotional and kind of relational connection you have with your consumers.
And brand love, as it, this is probably the most interesting question for me, because I'm obsessed with both brand and marketing, but also with sales. I probably the most interesting thing of going into corporate life was, these much bigger companies have such bigger companies than my dad had at a liquor store. They're really not looking at sales on a day-to-day, second-by-second level, nor can they, right? Because I wasn't running a national commercial or putting my logo on a basketball jersey, so I didn't have to really figure out what did that mean. Have you been able to create correlations of brand love to business performance? And how much of a challenge is that to get across the cynicism that maybe the client looks at that report? Like what's the, I find that it's been fascinating that a report, whether it's a Kantar or your company or Nielsen's, is blindly accepted, and every other report is like dead on arrival until it crosses the chasm of blindly accepted. It's ironically a meta game of brand within themselves. When I set up the question that way, what's the things that run through your mind, or the answers to those kind of questions?
Yeah, first, I love the question, and I'm equally obsessed because I think that, I'm very aware, having worked with clients, you cannot sit in an ivory tower and preach about, your any sort of metric without the dollar that goes behind it, whether it's the CMO who needs to report that or the CEO who cares about it. So one of the exercises I definitely focused on this year was how do these correlate or particularly drive all of our steps of the funnel. So that could be awareness, it could be consideration, usage, and then even, as I mentioned, we have NPS and kind of that loyalty, kind of retention metric, if you will. So we see, especially this year, there's a 49-point gap, which is massive, in net purchasing consideration between our most loved brands and all other brands. So that's just consideration. That's, if you're in the decision set,
no, but what's
that
funny,
tells you that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like when I hear that, that makes the single most sense to me in the world, right? I think brand love will continue to rise in importance, because I think the other thing that COVID has made clear to me and others is the friction of purchasing exactly what you want will continue to go away. And so for example, when I was a retailer, I did not want to sell the brands that had the most love, because my dad and I store sold those items at dead cost, because we were selling Kendall Jackson or Yellowtail or Santa Margarita at these prices to bring customers in. But everything in my store was designed to not let you buy it. It was on the bottom shelf. I would have humongous displays around it to make you buy a different Chardonnay for $1 less. As we go into a more digital landscape where people can buy what they want to buy by just typing it into whatever queue, all of a sudden the end caps or all the other things that a retailer does to try to make you buy a more profitable item than the brand that you actually love, the friction's eliminated, which would create a scenario where the brands that are loved would actually gather more market share. Is that how you see it?
Yes, and there's an important nuance around that, but I will first completely agree that this is, we did a whole analysis around kind of the Byron Sharp mentality around availability and mental availability being a big part of that. To your point exactly, if the first thing you search in is Clorox or Kleenex, then any other tissue brand is screwed. That's a big part of it. So it's a good flywheel for the big brands. It's a challenge for the smaller brands. But then we have Gen Z. So this generation, their awareness of big brands and their affinity for big brands is a quarter basically of what it is for other generations, which tells you, when we think about the brand portfolio that this generation is aware of, the things that are cutting through, there's going to be a lot more things because they're very digitally active. They're, engaging with, they're thinking about different drivers, if you will, things, again, stakeholders, how they're reacting to social issues that are.
Not only that, I apologize, because I know we're wrapping out of time, but to your point, social issues and things of that nature. But there is a thing that very few talk about, which is the biggest brands in the world have continuously looked at these social network channels as afterthoughts of places to build brand. They think they're building brand on television, and they'll do some matching luggage social media posts, while other brands have actually done true marketing. And nothing's changed with Gen Z and the greatest generation. What's changed is the biggest brands in the world are allocating less money and energy than even tiny brands in these channels, thus losing market share, because that's where the attention graph is.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And it only becomes more of an issue as you think about this younger generation leaning especially into those channels. If you're not there in the way that feels authentic and intuitive, it's a big risk for sure.
Victoria, thank you so much. I'm sorry we're out of time, but we're trying to get to everybody today, but we're really appreciative and we wish you all the best. Andrea?
Our next guest is Ed Pilkington. He's the Chief Marketing and Innovation Officer for Diageo North America. Ed oversees marketing and innovation for Diageo's full portfolio of spirits and beer across the United States and Canada. Ed brings over 25 years of experience with Diageo to his role, starting his career as an assistant country manager, managing distributors for Guinness across the Caribbean market. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Ed. Full disclosure, I'm extremely fond of this human being, so he's probably going to get a fluffy interview. Ed, why don't you give a little context of, I'm not sure I knew about the Caribbean part. That excited me. So wait, you were just like, how did you get that gig to be able to peddle liquor in the Caribbean out the gate? Sounds like a pretty fun start to one's career.
Yeah, I went in, it's funny, people talk about take a stand, say what you want to do. When I was looking for a job, I just wanted to sell stuff around the world. Honestly, that was my brief. I'd lived as a student, I'd lived in Mexico, I'd lived in Spain, I'd traveled around, and I just kind of wanted to, get out there and sell stuff. So I managed to talk myself into a gig. And the next thing I knew, I was cruising around the Caribbean selling Guinness and Johnny Walker.
When you talk about that from that perspective, because I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of different constituents here. I think, Victoria, thank you again, brought a ton of value, especially for the major marketers on this call. But I'm going to zone in here, Ed, a little bit on your early journey, because I think there's a lot of people here who have no interest in ever doing anything in marketing or working in a big brand. But what you just said caught me, so I'm going to spend 1 second on it. Do you believe, because you were so passionate of seeing the world, or whatever rationale you had to wanting to sell things around the world, that you were then more in tune to both listen to opportunities, but also speak up to take opportunities, and thus the strategy was realized because it actually was your agenda and intent at hand? It wasn't that you got lucky, it's you were looking for it at every angle, and thus it became.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I had a fascination for getting out and seeing the world. I really wanted to. I didn't want to be limited. Everyone can tell I'm British, but I spent 20 years of my life living outside of Britain because I didn't want to be stuck on, it's a great island, but I didn't want to be stuck on that island forever. So I had a fascination. And I do think there's a bit, if you want to go after something, you've got to go for it, haven't you? And I think it just makes it more interesting. And I just wanted to get lots of different experience and just see different parts of the world and do different stuff. And I think you also realize, I mean, I think the great thing about moving around the place is that cliche of similarities and differences. Because I remember after about 3.5 years, I worked in the Caribbean, I did some work in Mexico, and I thought, well, I better go back and get a job in the UK. I better work in the UK for a couple of years. And it was interesting, the perceptions around, you've worked in Mexico, but what would you know about working in the UK? And you realize there's huge similarities, but obviously there's certain differences. And I think, so one, I think it's just really interesting doing that. And two, to your point, I think, if you go after something you want to do, then you really make it happen. And I loved it. I just wanted to, so that first job was brilliant. I just had this massive opportunity to go and shape a business in the Caribbean, and it was an important business, but I was kind of left alone. It was great, and I was like 23. It was awesome.
Good for you. Talk to me about the current landscape. Let's go that was macro. Let's go super micro. You've obviously played a role in the global nature of this company, with incredible iconic brands like Johnny Walker and others. What is the challenge in this current landscape? Obviously the liquor industry affected from the fact that people can't go to bars and restaurants like we've seen in the past. Like what's been the biggest challenge in this COVID reality?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, I mean, it's been tough, and also the industry is fortunate. So the tough thing is, and where it's not been fortunate, is clearly, as you say, I mean, bars, restaurants, which whilst they're slowly opening up, have been shut down, and the impact on the hospitality industry has been huge. And so obviously ourselves and all people across the industry has been brilliant in responding, have been very much out there in terms of trying to help the industry, basically, and help the hospitality industry. So that's the first thing, and I can talk about that. And we've done, as you know, quite a lot in terms of really supporting bartenders in the industry. And actually, we've got some great work breaking at the moment on Crown, but I'll try not to do the immediate plug on that. But what we also realize, people are drinking. I mean, look, where we're fortunate is we're an industry where people have been at home, and even as people slowly come out, people still want to enjoy a drink, hopefully responsibly. And it's just where they drink is changing. The on-premise, again, as you probably know, Gary, is about 20% of our business. So we lost 20%. At the time, they reckoned, all the industry estimates were that we needed to pick up about 22% extra in the off-premise for the business to kind of.
And for everybody's watching, because obviously this is the industry I grew up in. On-premise, bars and restaurants, off-premise, retail, just to ground them. Keep going.
The on, literally where you drink on a premise. So bars and restaurants are shutting down, and look, the industry has well surpassed that. Spirits is interesting. Spirits tends to do well in a crisis. So spirits tends to lead well, then it's followed by wine. And
a good stiff drink when your kids have been bothering you all day. Is makes a hell of a lot of sense. That's right.
Exactly. But it really is, statistically, it's like every 2008, 10, 2000, you look at it, spirits peak. So we knew all that stuff. So actually when it first hit back in March, we said, look, first thing is we've got to regain the volume. Second thing is basically spirits will tend to do well. A bit what Victoria said, big brands will do well. People return to big brands. It's safety, it's comfort. So we put some principles in place, which were comfort, utility, and service. And one was comfort was all about making sure all our comms was relevant for that moment. It was kind of reassuring. It put a smile on people's face. We didn't want to do doom and gloom. Oh my God, the world's coming to an end type of stuff. We're a fun industry at the end of the day. We want, the moment when you had that, hopefully Johnny Walker at the end of the day or Bullet or whatever, it's kind of for all that we're stuck here, try and make the most of it and enjoy it, and we can be a part of that. And then utility was about, how do you make it easy for people to buy our brands, again, when 20% of the business is gone. And look, Gary, I don't need to talk to you about e-com because you know more about it than virtually everyone on this call. But as you probably know, I mean, if you take spirits, only 25% of people going into COVID knew they could buy spirits online. Within
in America,
25% of people had. So, just that digital acceleration is phenomenal. Really. And then the service piece was, what are we going to do across all of our brands to help communities? And again, I thought it was interesting what Victoria said about brand love and communities and that community element of it. And we're still doing that.
Let's paint a picture or two. What, anything you can share about supporting partners and communities, bartenders, restaurants, communities, anything?
Yeah, big time. So we started, I mean, if you remember, it all kicked off, roughly 13th of March when I think everyone went into lockdown. 17th was St. Pat's, all the breaks. And of course, we kicked off with, so we flipped from doing what was going to be massive activation in all the Irish pubs and bars and in the parades to just putting out some copy, which was We'll March Again. And we just did that emotional, we've signed a lease for 9,000 years. This is just one moment in time. We'll be around for a long time. And it had a huge impact. And, what we did, we just got that message out. And honestly, kind of our business, it was our keg business, which is the draft business of the pints you get in a pub, obviously disappeared overnight. Our business in cans that you buy in a liquor store, in a grocery store, has just boomed. So that really helped because people actually realised they could buy Guinness at home. We gave a lot to the Bartender Guild. We've helped the Restaurant Association, and it tends to be brand by brand. So Don Julio's really helped the Restaurant Association. We've done some Diageo stuff. And actually a really interesting thing we're doing now as we go into almost the next phase, which is probably as people start to come out. We just launched over the weekend with Crown Royal, a program which basically is giving to help kind of stages, so live music and bars. And it's basically a song with Ari Lennox and Anthony Ramos, who we worked with before. And basically it's the old Sly and the Family Stone song. And it's basically, we've had 500,000 downloads, and basically for every download we give $1 to help bars. And it's really cool. And it's all organic reach, actually. We had it all over the weekend, so it's been amazing. Bullet, we just launched new work on Bullet, which is all about heroing bartenders. And again, everything we do, we raise money and we give basically to bartenders to support them. Because still loads of them are working, if they're working, it's 1 or 2 days a week, basically.
And what's the, as a leading CMO, and obviously you're very focused on your business, but to be a CMO, you must pay attention at some level. What do you think is, obviously, I can stand on my soapbox in perpetuity around people underestimating these social channels to do branding, kind of the part Victoria and I touched on in the prior session. But from your perspective, what's the biggest misconception of you and your peer set's point of view, like the current state of these great CMOs, which there's a ton, in your intuitive gut, or maybe in your own findings over the last 18 months, what are some of the missed opportunities, or in a more politically correct way, what are the things that, you can kind of see becoming a bigger part of the marketing tool belt over the next kind of 2 to 3 years based on things that have been accepted from the past that are no longer ringing to be true, or things that are emerging quickly that are dictating the consideration or purchase of products in communication channels?
Yeah, well, I think, look, Gary, you're amazing at this. I think that, look, everyone's been, the pace of change over the last 4 or 5 months, and the pace of change in digital, I think all CMOs are getting their heads around, because for all that, I'd like to think I'd say that example of Crown, that's all done through social basically. So that's, we have broken on TV, I think yesterday, because we still need a bit of reach, and we still need to put it out there, and we do that. And, with NFL coming up, we'll be visible. Yep. So you still got to do that. So you've got to balance that. But I think that acceleration is huge. And I think that, and I think everyone's and again, you've been ahead of the game on this, but in terms of sort of the shift to e-commerce in industries where the perception was you couldn't do it or it was hard. And I think what we're seeing is people are finding ways around to make stuff happen. And
do you feel
legislation's changing?
Yeah,
because,
that's right.
Because this whole thing is just forcing basically legislators to look and say, well, hold on a second, we've got in some cases, some examples of legislation which is just archaic and not right and doesn't help the consumer. And suddenly we're doing stuff which is just going to make consumers' lives easier. And I think that's a big part of CMO's job, is how do you make a consumer's life easier? How do you make it easier for them to buy stuff? How do you make it easier to see what they want to buy? How do you make it easier, in our case, for people to make drinks at home, or to bake, or to do their gardening and stuff like that? That's all the stuff, as people get more hobbies. Just, I think there's a big piece about how do we make, help around, I think it's utility. It's how do you almost help a piece around, consumers make their lives easier, and then put your brand at the heart of it.
Do you feel that, I'm sorry to interrupt you because I only have 2 minutes, but I want to get this question in. Do you think that COVID in a lot of ways created a scenario that sped up the knowledge of certain marketers in certain behaviors, back to your earlier point?
Yeah, massively. I think it's forced. I think pivot is a slightly overused word, but everyone's had to pivot and look differently, haven't they? I think it had to, because, in our case, if you lose 20% of your business, in some cases more, you've got to do something differently. So if you don't move quickly, you've got to. And I think it has sped up because the pace of change in terms of how consumers are. So if you just got to be close to what consumers are doing, how consumers are, and you've got to move quickly. It's simple as that. And the other one I would say is the whole thing about, I think it's a really interesting one about, with all the societal change we're seeing as well and everything, the whole thing about how brands operate in an authentic way as a kind of force for good, shall we say. And how do you do it in a way which can be done, which is seen to be authentic, because consumers are, they're good judges of brands. So if you seem to be doing it the right way, and I think that's really accelerated as well in the last few years.
It's funny you said something, parting shot. That was so interesting to me. Consumers are a good judge. To me, they're the judge and the jury, right?
Totally.
I think that they are truly the Supreme Court. We can all sit here and we have an incredible executive coming up for you here now. Like, this is some real firepower, but the reality is what we do in our meeting rooms play out in real life. And the cold, harsh reality is, if you look at marketing's effectiveness in a business context, it misses the mark quite a bit during especially times like this. Yeah. I would argue the only parallel in modern history to this was when society was becoming more of a television society, not a radio society. And there was a lot of brands that lost market share because they couldn't make their scripts with voiceovers, which crushed. They didn't understand how to make a great commercial. And I think, to your point, things are moving so quickly. Having the context to make the content is a big challenge.
Yeah. And it means you got to therefore be more nimble in terms of when you make the content. We're making more than ever before. We have to.
Most consumers that are watching right now have no idea that it takes 9 months, sometimes for a brand to get a commercial out there, between testing and strategy and selling it through and then shooting it and testing it. And, I don't think people realize the lack of speed. Yeah.
And actually, and that's the thing it's funny. I've just got, I was just getting a message from, we're shooting the new Guinness work at the moment. And it's, we produced it it's going to be record time again. Because it has to be, because we just got to start to.
Because it can be. Because it can be. Thanks for being on, my friend. Brilliant. I wish you well.
Cheers, Gary. Lovely to see you.
Cheers.
Brilliant. Cheers.
Thanks, Ed. Next up is Kimberly Gardner, the VP and Chief Marketing Officer of Mitsubishi Motors North America. Kimberly is responsible for overseeing all marketing communications activities for Mitsubishi in the United States, including brand strategy, digital, social and broadcast advertising, creative development, strategic planning, retail marketing, CRM, and data analytics. Wow. Welcome, Kimberly, live from the back of your car.
Great to be here, Andrea, and great to see you, Gary.
Great to see you, Kimberly. This is so on brand. I mean,
I
to
know.
be actually in the back of your car, I mean, this is so well done.
Yeah, you know what? Like I said before, this is the perfect place to have a call, right? It's quiet. I've got my, hotspot going with the Wi-Fi, so it's good.
Thanks for joining us. Kimberly, why don't you create some context for the audience? Give us a little bit about you and your career journey, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in automotive for all of 2 decades now. I started when I was really young. And one of the things I like to tell people about, what you might think about automotive is it's maybe slow paced, a bit traditional in terms of its nature. What attracted me to automotive in the first place was really the idea of change and about bringing change. And I was super excited when I read in grad school about this thing called the Prius and Toyota and what they were doing in terms of sustainability and alternative powertrains. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to make a big impact on an industry and really on consumers' lives. I've always found automotive so fascinating because the consumer life cycle and the interaction with the shopping process and ownership, it can be months and years really. So, I've stayed in it this long because I see so much opportunity to really try things differently and really appeal to new customers.
And as a child, were you were you a good student? Were you entrepreneurial? Were you drawing, singing, just to take it a little bit further back?
You know what? I guess I always thought of myself as somebody who could make things better. I grew up in a household, single parent, taking care of my younger sister since I was really young. I always had this sense of, I'm here to kind of take care of others and make things a little bit better. And I think that was a really nice fit for me, again, with automotive and with Toyota, especially, which is all about continuous improvement and trying to, make the world a little bit of a better place. I'm one of these people, and maybe it sounds zen or whatever, but it is what it is. And it's just, I feel like I'm here to make a positive impact. That is my purpose.
I'll go right into something I couldn't wait to speak to you about. You and I both know Jack Hollis. And as I've gotten to know you a little bit better, this concept of change agent really sticks with me, of your ambition. And obviously you wouldn't be at this point in your career if it wasn't also based on your execution. Again, for the entrepreneurs that are watching right now, or the students, because we have a very broad mix of individuals. And then obviously for a lot of your contemporaries that are watching this, what does it mean to be a change agent within a big organization? When I talk to entrepreneurs about my life in corporate land, they're always fascinated by the inability for big brands to do anything. They're just so, right. And so, and basically in hindsight, here I am, 11 years into it, and the makeup of the individuals that are on this show, the people I spend my time with, the ones that have become my friends outside of work, the ones that we target to do business with, I've come to realize oh, right, we're only looking for change agents because we're innovating. Thus, we have no shot. We're dead on arrival when we talk to 85% of the people in marketing, because they believe in the other things that are out there to be able to do with your money. And what does it mean to be a change agent? When do you even think of yourself that way? What are the challenges and what makes it fun? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no, I love it. First and foremost, yes, absolutely a change agent. I've never been afraid of change. I welcome it with open arms. I think it fuels me in what I do. And I would say to entrepreneurs or others who are wondering what that's like in a big organization that tends to move a bit slow, you know what, if you love what you do, if you love what you market, if you love the category that you're in, like I do, it fuels that passion, it fuels that patience at the same time, because you got to have both. Right? You got to have the passion to want to change. You have to see into the future. You have to be strategic and always think a little bit ahead about the what ifs. What if I paired something here with something over there? What would that look like and why? And then you have to have the patience to say, okay, how do I then sell that idea or sell that insight into the organization in a way that others are going to listen? Because it can be really easy to just follow one path, and it's a safer path, and it's the status quo. And so my job as a change agent is to make sure that I really educate others. I really get them excited about what could be, and I tell it to them in their own language. I talk in sales language. I talk in after sales language. I talk in CX language. I don't come along as, here's marketing trying to change the world and it's all about us. No way. It's going to be, dead stop. We're not going to go anywhere. If I talk in terms of other people's and other departments' objectives and what they're looking for, that's when I see their minds open up to change, and they think, oh, you know what, now that you mention it, that's really exciting. I like that idea because it helps me too. And I build that coalition of support early on when we're talking about trying something a bit different.
You're contextualizing and reverse engineering their objectives, not yours.
100%.
And you feel like that skill set translates both in making things real in a B2B environment and also ultimately in the work that's put out to the world to create consideration on the consumer end?
Yeah, yeah, well said, exactly. And you know what, I think too, with established brands, like we were talking about earlier, and that brand love, I think a lot of consumers want that consistency, right? They want that stability. They want to know that brands are going to be there for them, especially now. But at the same time, I think we all realize we've got to innovate. We've got to try something a bit different. And for automotive too, we've got to look outside the category. You know, and I know you're a proponent of this too, Gary. I mean, you've often talked about that when I've watched a lot of your content. You know, it's how do you really think outside of where you are in your world? Because that's where those sparks can really come from.
Yeah, I think that's right. Talk to me about something, you know, it's funny, the role, you have this incredible role, and Mitsubishi is an incredibly big company by many people's standards, but in the automotive world, you've got a lot of smaller dynamics. You know, I'm sure there's sometimes in your most frustrated state, I'm sure you're thinking about like, well, Sally over at my competition has 10 times more money to spend to make that happen. What are the pros and cons of having a smaller brand in a competitive set, yet it's still not a tiny company?
Yeah, no, it's an awesome question. And you are right. I do look at my competitors and I say, man, I wish I had a little fraction more money, man, because like, think what I could do. But it's okay because, you know, it's like the beauty of constraint, right? It's like creative. The more constraints you have, sometimes the more creative you have to be. So the small company environment with, you know, you're working with pennies and dimes on the dollar, you've got to be super smart from the beginning. And I think it allows more creativity than maybe people might think, in terms of not only thinking about the work that we do, the customers that we target, how we go to market, but also in terms of, you know, looking outside the category again, right? Because I look at smaller companies, I look at D2C, digitally native brands that, hey, they've launched without massive, you know, broadcast campaigns, right? How do we learn from that? How do we be scrappier and more nimble? And quite frankly, it's the best of both worlds because I can be in an established industry. I think that's got a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, I can be a small part of that. And I can suggest change with the executive team that I'm a part of and affect that change because I only have a few of us in the room and they know me as, you know, she's going to be the change agent. She's probably going to come up with an idea here. Watch out. But I think they really appreciate that because I come at it from, I know this is going to help the entire team. So I can do that so much more easily in a smaller organization. Yeah. But it's the best of both worlds.
And so to that point, I'm sure in a lot of ways, once you calibrated real life vulnerabilities associated with COVID, you know, like hope everyone's healthy and safe. And then obviously, you know, listen, I don't think people are running out to their local dealership right now. You know, there must have been a transition in your mind, whether it was 24 hours or 24 days into this, where you're like, okay, my skill set is really needed in times like this. How have you kind of contributed? You know, I find you, and I've gotten to know you a little bit here now. You know, I think you're intuitively consumer centric, which gives you your biggest advantage. So I'm curious what your take was during this time, and were you able to, you know, adjust or create, or what happened in real life over these last 200 days?
Yeah, no, awesome question. You know, I think in the beginning, a lot of us were lost a little bit, right? In so many ways, you know, anybody that had anything to do with retail, closing down quickly, some things are operational, some things aren't. How do you even check hours? How do you help our retailers, our dealers first and foremost was the first 24, 48 hours, few weeks really. Yeah. And that still happens. So first and foremost, you know, because I think of things more broadly and customer centric, I have to think of our dealers first and foremost. And then I have to think of our customers, our end customers who buy the cars and service their cars at the same time. And I think that first wave was really, what resources do we have? How do we help them be more comfortable with you know, being more flexible and having multiple playbooks? Because if you just have one way of doing it, right? Here's my service, here's my sales, that's what I do. And everything is pulled away from you in an instant and you can't be operational. You're not sure if customers are comfortable coming into your store. You're not even really sure, like, where does automotive fit into all this? Are we going to see a big dive? Are we going to see a big uptick? What's going to go on? So I think a lot of it in the beginning was really reassurance, right? You know, this is what we can do to help as the corporate arm of our company. How can we help you navigate things, even as basic as make sure your Google My Business pages are updated, right? Make sure that those things are there. Make sure that people know the messaging first and foremost, so they go to your website, they have questions, that they have the information that they need. So it's really helped, and interestingly enough, to accelerate, I think, this digitization, right? This digital kind of wave that has been coming for quite a while in our industry. But
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I asked Ed earlier if it helped speed up the process. Do you feel people more senior than you, your contemporaries, people underneath you, do you feel like there's a advancement on understanding the importance of digital communication?
I think there's had to be. Yeah, absolutely. I think it accelerated in the beginning because of those basic things, right? My hours of operation. How do I tell my customers where things are at? How do I still sell cars in this environment where there's got to be no contact sales and service? And then from a customer standpoint, you know, we like to think of our customers in this neat and tidy, their old school funnel, right, this path that they take that we've talked about before, which bugs me because it doesn't look like that. Nobody is the same. We all follow different paths. And
actually, since I only have you for 2 more minutes, and I know this is something you caught my attention, bring this up in a closed environment, not in the public setting, reach versus relevance. Yeah. Because that's kind of where you're bleeding into a little bit here. Exactly. Just explain to people that concept and how you view it.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it again as if you've got one customer journey or one mindset or one playbook in the way you've done business. COVID and the last several months have really taught us you've got to have a lot more variability. You have to have a lot more customization. You have to try to do your best to do one-to-one as best you can. It's so much more about relevance right now, because reach, it's helpful, it's great, of course, but in this time when customers are all over the place in terms of what they're looking for and their behaviors and their attitudes and their thoughts, then we can't just have one way to do it. And it's got to be relevant. You don't know, I may be somebody who never bought a car before. I live in New York City. Now suddenly, you know what, personal transportation, I want it, I need to get it. I've never shopped for a car before. Or you may have somebody that feels like, look, I thought I needed a car, but I'm going to put that off for that decision maybe for a few more months. So you can't talk to everybody in the same way. It's going to be lost in translation, so to speak. So it's up to us now to figure out that relevancy.
Kimberly, do you think that the creative industry, the madman, the agent, like, where do you put this onus? Because I think, the thing that I came into about year 7, because I knew the digital channels so well, I understood the media part, but it was year 7 where I was like, oh, there is no creative agency to go to make 17 commercials. Let's just use that terminology, whether it's an OTT or YouTube, right? You can't go to these brilliant Wine and Crisp and, Droga. There's nowhere for these big brands to go that they work with that will make 17 commercials for the price of 1. And that's kind of when we started our journey of like, can we be the ones that do that? Is that on the brands to require those agencies to go there? Is that on the agencies because of the consolidation? Like, why did we get to this place from your perspective?
Yeah. You know what, Gary, I think it's a combination of both. I think it has to come from the brand to say, look, I understand my customer and I should better than anyone, right? And there's not just one customer profile. There's not just one customer path. And with all of that, coupled with technology and coupled with that path to get there from interest to purchase and around again, I need to be able to customize that message for where that person is. And for a challenger brand like ours, we have to really value each of those touch points. So if I don't speak to you individually, I'm going to lose you along that path. I think it's up to us as brands. And I think agencies need to, I don't want to say wake up, but they need to perk up a little bit and say, okay, there's a business opportunity here to talk to customers in a really, individual kind of a way to make them really feel like we hear you, we want to help you, we're here along the way, along that journey. And I don't understand a world where that seems to make sense, at least not in terms of smaller brands like ours. So we're looking for agency partners to get ahead of that and to help us with that.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Gary. Pleasure.
Bye, Kimberly.
Our next guest is Melinda Goldstein, the Chief Marketing Officer for Hain Celestial, a global organic and natural products company. After more than 15 years of consumer packaged goods experience across companies like Unilever, Mars Chocolate, and Mondelez, Melinda took the leap to run marketing and sales for an emerging food brand fairly recently. She's known for understanding the human connection required for building brand love, as well as the strategies and tactics that drive business results. Welcome, Melinda.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm
Hi,
so
Melinda,
excited
how are
to
you?
be here. Very excited to be here. I think it's so cool what you're doing with this series. I watched some of the episodes and I think it's just an awesome way to get people together during this crazy time. So excited to be here.
Yeah, we always think like, why not karma, right? Like, why not, you know, I have a very large audience of aspiring marketers. So this to them is like, I mean, I've gotten literally hundreds of emails of, I'm learning more from marketing from the now than I am in my classroom that I'm paying a lot of money for. And so thank you. And then obviously friendships are made, you know, it's always fun to watch, like Ed's still in the back room, watch it, like relationships, like it's really nice. It's really nice. And thank you for saying that, Melinda. Before we actually get into you and then back into the business, I think a lot of times when we mention holding companies or the names of a corporation, people don't. So I think just for 5 seconds on the Hain side, what are some of the brands within it? Because that might give some context for the individuals watching.
Yeah, absolutely. People always say to me when I've said, oh, I'm taking a job with Hain Celestial, they're like, oh, I don't know what that is. And then I tell them, oh, we have Terra Chips and Sensible Portions Garden Veggie Straws and some personal care brands like Alba, which you may have used for Sun, Earth's Best baby food. A lot of people know that, one of the first organic baby foods. So those are just kind of a sampling, but we have, you know, probably another 5 to 10 that most people would know across all of these food and personal care categories. So really great brands. And part of what we're going to try to do is get more people to know about these brands and a really cool transformation journey that we're on to get there. So
yeah, but to your point, I definitely know that all your millennial moms with young children really know the brands that, you're talking about. So kudos on that portfolio. So what about your career journey? Because again, as I just mentioned earlier, the audience here runs the gamut of CEOs of Fortune 50 companies to, sophomores at art school at an agency, or people that want to be brand managers that are at MBAs right now. What was your journey and how did you stumble into it? Or was it extremely much the focus of, 16-year-old Melinda to eventually get into brand marketing?
Yeah, so it's funny. It was definitely not the first place that I went to. I actually started out in finance and accounting, which most people look at me and are like, "You were an accountant? You were a CPA? I don't understand. I don't see it." I'm like, yeah, I didn't see it either. That's why I didn't spend a lot of time there. So about 3 or 4 years, and then I said, okay, this is not for me. And I did go back to get an MBA and went into marketing. And I think it was great because as Andrea said in the upfront, I really am about human connections and really the insights and motivations that drive people. And when you put that together with the business side, which I had so much background in on finance, it just made a lot of sense for me that brand management was a really strong place that I could play. And I always did want to be in food from the time that I started looking into brand management. It's just, to me, it's so much an integral part of our lives. It's emotional, it's physical. Look at it right now during COVID and how much of an important factor it is in the way people are thinking about their behaviors and the dynamics that are changing. A lot of it is related to how they shop for and how they're consuming food and where they're consuming it. So it's just so interesting. And I still learn about it and have just these moments of ahas every day about how people are thinking about food. So I started with Mondelez before it was actually Mondelez. So it was Kraft. And I've been in big multinational, multi-billion-dollar food companies, CPG companies for most of my career. And I will say I've learned a ton in those companies. So, I don't have any regrets about spending most of my career in large companies, both from the context of learning what people will say classical CPG training is. So working with some big budgets and iconic brands, and also working on some challenger brands and learning from great leaders and mentors and team members and having resources and training and
let's give a little love at Kraft early on. Who were 1 or 2 kind of mentors that kind of you really looked up to or eventually got to work with? Anybody stand out in those early days?
Yeah, gosh, that's a good question. So, I was at Kraft for a relatively short period of time. I would say one of my directors was Andrew Burke, who went on to lead some other companies. And he had some interesting comments that I would always bring up of, perception is reality, right? Whether it's your personal career or consumers, maybe one thing may be true about you or maybe true about your brand, but if people don't perceive it that way, it actually doesn't matter. So, that's kind of one person that comes to mind right away. But, I'll also say I learned a lot in these big companies about what I don't want to do and how I don't want to lead going forward. So, you know, the way we can sometimes talk ourselves into something because we're comfortable with it, instead of, you know, the things that we probably are uncomfortable with are the places we need to be pushing in many cases to get the breakthrough and the remarkability and talkability that we need on our brand. So I think I learned a lot there. And, you know, I kind of then made the leap to go work for an emerging startup food brand, which was really hard and risky for me to do. And I think it was probably the most, you know, momentous change in my career in the way that I thought about my brands and my business, and also just personally the way that I kind of approach things, in that it's really easy to just stay in your lane in a large company and not get the context of everything that's going on, and, you know, almost kind of step out and say, well, this isn't my job, but I'm going to do it anyway, or I'm going to learn about it anyway, because it's going to make me a better marketer and a better business person. And in some ways, I wish I had known that earlier in my career. I probably would have been, you know, learning things in these big companies that I didn't know. And I encourage anyone, whether you're in a big company or a small company, get to know everything you can about every function beyond marketing if you're a marketer, because it will make you stronger. It'll make you think about the business differently and think about consumers differently.
It's a really powerful point, having the context point. You know, a lot of people struggle. I'm very Renaissance man. Like, I've got my, you know, little vibes in almost everything. And I have some really fun late night conversations with really bright and brilliant people around the notion of width versus depth. And I've always been a huge fan of extreme narrow depth in something that you enjoy and end up being good at, complemented by extraordinary width, because you need the context to make your depth so much stronger. And as you were talking, that's what kind of, you know, that's what I heard, which is like, you're going to be a marketer and you need to know it. But if you actually have empathy to why Toys R Us or ShopRite does that, or why your sales team is pushing back on you because they have to hit their quotas this month and they don't care about your new innovation, their client's just going to buy this thing and they'll hit, like, if you understand, well, then all of a sudden you can be better at your deep thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or where operationally you're going to run into issues, you know, anticipate those and have those conversations up front. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, not, you know, for me to some extent, we're accelerators, we're type A, and early in your career, especially, you're a little bit afraid to acknowledge the things that you don't know. So again, it's great because you can focus on the things you know and you can be a superstar there and you'll, you know, keep moving up the line. But again, if you can have the courage to just admit, hey, I'm not really familiar with this area, tell me a little bit more about it, or this is something that, you know, I think would be interesting, you know, can really help you, in the now, and it can also help you, you know, as you go forward in your career. And like I said, I think being at a startup really crystallized that for me, because you have to kind of thrown into it. But it's great because now at Hain, you know, I'm very much talking to everybody, getting involved in things that I probably wouldn't have in the past, and, you know, inserting myself into conversations or areas that aren't technically my job, but that, again, make me a better business person and make me better at, you know, marketing our brands at the end of the day.
Melinda, you started at Hain when again?
It was the end of April, so just over 4 months now.
Right. So
feels like a long time.
So talk to me about, because I think there's some people, again, thinking about the broadness of the audience, maybe some people that are struggling and or excelling in their new jobs that happened, let's say from January on, right? They either had just started in a new company, boom, COVID. Some people literally like within that March 1 and then 13 days later. And then other people joined companies post COVID. You know, how is it leading? Because you go into this huge leadership role. How is it leading remotely?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely awkward at first because it's not, you know, we're not familiar with it. I mean, yeah. I interviewed in person with just a couple of people in the office the day before everything shut down. And then I had another round of interviews virtually and started virtually. And so, you know, I'm leading and yeah, you have to manage up, you have to manage across, you have a new team of people, a lot of people. And I'm a social animal. I've never had to work at building relationships. And this is probably the first time that I actually had to mentally prepare, carve out time, you know, think about how I'm actually going to build relationships, because the business part.
You want on serendipity, walking the halls. Oh, I haven't seen Carol in a while. Let me go have a coffee with her for 6 minutes. Even something you said earlier, I wanted to jump in, but I'm trying not to interrupt. You know, knowing where roadblocks are. So many of you that are on this program have figured out how to build constituents. It's really like politics. You're learning how to, hey, I know Carl is going to try to stop me. Let me go eat lunch with Carl for a month and become friends, which will at least give me a prayer to make that's real life. That's real life.
And that's hard to do remotely, right? So it's not the getting things done, the business part of it's actually really easy remotely. You can kind of slide right into that, but the personal relationships, they're harder. And, you know, like I said, I had to carve out time. And one of my first meetings with my full team that was reporting to me, somebody's cat walked by, you know, on the screen. And I said, oh, you know, I love this when I see people's pets and who has pets. And, you know, we didn't have a lot of time. We had other stuff we had to talk about, but we spent, you know, 10 minutes at least with people sharing pictures and bringing their cats and dogs into the room, and everyone kind of lit up. And it was the moment where, you know, it felt like you were actually starting to get to know who they were instead of just, all right, let's just have, you know, check these 5 things off the list and get off the call. And it did make a difference. You know, people did talk differently, both amongst themselves in the team and with me after that. So you just kind of have to be human a little bit to build those relationships, but you have to think about it remotely again, which I think is different.
I love that. Talk to me about, we haven't touched on e-commerce a whole lot in today's world, and I know that's a passion point. So here in the last 3 or 4 minutes, the approach, how you see the landscape, the opportunities, the pitfalls, you know, what are your thoughts across the board on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that Hain has actually been working on a lot in the e-commerce space, both kind of supply chain and media and assortment before I started for probably a good 12 to 24 months. So it was nice to come in and feel like things were already in place and not have to scramble to get things going. But, you know, the biggest aha I would say is I remember being at Unilever not that long ago, and omnichannel was like a buzzword, right? We had a checklist of things we had to do for omnichannel, and everyone's like, all right, I got to do my omnichannel checklist. But it wasn't really embedded in the way that we were thinking about, you know, approaching kind of the world. And now you have to. It's a burning platform. Omnichannel is not a buzzword anymore. It's a reality, and we have to think about it that way. Retailers are thinking about it that way. You know, we are building it into the way that we go through customer business planning. It has to be part of what you're thinking about when you're launching a new product. So, you know, it's a totally different world than it was even just a couple of years ago. And I think the other part of that is, you know, we're doing trainings and things like that mostly because we have to have a consistent language in the way that we talk about it across different areas of the company. But it's not like a one training and you walk away, just dump it and everyone can kind of use it. It's really just continuous learning, and we're all learning about this every day. It's changing on the fly as we are, you know, as we're moving forward here day to day. So, you know, we have to admit that we're all new to it. It's not like I'm the omnichannel expert. There's no one person in the organization you can go to anymore that's your expert. We're all responsible for it. We all own it. And it's the strategy, it's the reality, it's no more a buzzword. So, you know, if you don't do that, you're not going to be successful. And I think that's something that, you know, our competitors are certainly going to be doing, our retailers and suppliers are doing. And so it's important for us, and we're embracing it and living it across the organization.
And do you think there's more buy-in because of COVID?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it definitely accelerated, you know, every metric, especially for food, right? Food, kind of online grocery was really struggling in the past, and it kind of skyrocketed as a really important area. So I think, you know, as you said, buy-in, you know, when you think about leadership where it might not have been people's focus, now all of a sudden it's, well, what are you doing in e-commerce and omnichannel? And it's funny because there are people in our organization who are like, wow, we've been doing this for 12 months and finally people are noticing. So, you know, it's an interesting dynamic, but it's not going away. It's definitely the future of how we need to think about this.
Humans will buy food on the internet. That is correct.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Next up is Jorge Olague, the Deputy Director of all things fundraising for Unicef. In his role, Jorge leads the global private sector resource mobilization efforts, working together with UNICEF's 34 international committees, country offices, donors, and corporate partners to make a positive difference for the world's children. Jorge has been with UNICEF since 2011 and has worked for both for-profit companies like General Motors in addition to nonprofits. Welcome, Jorge.
Hola.
Jorge, great to see you again. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your role at UNICEF, and for the 3 people that are unaware of the incredible organization, maybe a little bit about UNICEF itself.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the invitation, first of all. And I was just in a meeting with 4 of your guys, with Becky, with Miles, with Rob, and Dubose as well.
Thank
So Unicef is the United Nations agency that makes sure that every child's rights is respected everywhere. So that's the right to have an education, to be healthy, to be protected from abuse, to be able to express themselves and to find their way into life. And this is what we do. And we work with millions of people around the world. And actually, I think we should be all proud, not only UNICEF people, the world should be proud. We're actually, until COVID hit, we are still on track, but we're going to have a bit of a challenge now. We're really accruing incredible successes. The number of people, the percentage of children out of the school, the difference between the schooling of girls and boys, the number of people, the percentage of people which are minorities were at all-time lows. We have now a bit of a huge challenge because there's a risk we may lose the progress of the last 2 decades because of COVID, and we have quite a few challenges there. And that's what we need to make sure that we avoid. My job is basically to coordinate the fundraising and partnership efforts around the world. We work in 190 countries to make sure that we have the resources to make sure that we can offer those children the life they deserve.
How did you make the transition from, the corporate background, General Motors, I think, if I recall properly, right? How did that even happen? Was that something that you thought a lot about for years and then finally made the jump? Was that something that was, you grew up with and your parents were passionate about? Or did you meet somebody along the way? Or did you get burnt out? Or did you, did you wake up one morning and you just knew? Or how did it actually happen? Because I'm always passionate about that transition in one's life. And I think a lot of people are watching right now, no matter what their situation is, a certain percentage wants to make a hard pivot in their lives. And you've done that. That is a shift from going from that kind of corporate momentum you had to this kind of organization. What was your specific story and what did you learn from it? Or maybe other people within the UNICEF ecosystem, what is a shared commonality or an insight that might help somebody? Jorge, hold on. You're on mute. Just want to make sure we get you unmuted here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can, my friend. Go ahead.
All right.
No problem.
Sorry. So, yes, good question. I grew up in a family where we're kind of, I'm from Spain, as you can probably tell from my accent. And, I went to a school where I was always being drilled. It was a Catholic school, very progressive, where it was all about making sure that you give back, that your capacities you put at the service to other people, etc. This is going to sound very quaint. And the other impact that really hit me hard is when I was in the Boy Scouts, and we had this mantra, right? And we went to a new campsite or whatever. It was all about living it in better shape than it was when we arrived. And that stays there, right?
That's nice.
And then my father, as it happens, had a friend when nobody in Spain. Spain was a very locked up country, if I may, but this guy was working for the UN and he kept telling me stories about when he was kind of working in Afghanistan, etc. So it stays back of the mind. I then study economics, and Spain is going through one of their periodical crises, and when you get a good job, you grab it. General Motors calls, then you jump. It's I was having fun with Kimberly, by the way, talking about the automotive industry. And you're working there and you're doing very well. I was brand manager and stuff like that. And we were doing good things as well. It was not only the money, it was the fact that, for example, we could compete on things which were relevant to people, having airbags, for example, and saving lives, etc. So it was always there, but I kept on having this dream of working for the UN. And once I always bought the Economist, the magazine where you have the vacancy announcements. And they're always kind of like, if you have 7 degrees on gender and development studies and speak 14 languages, then send your CV. And for once, there was this ad which was asking for somebody with marketing experience in large corporations. I said, okay, send it in. And they called me and they hired me. And it was, there's a change. You need to adapt to a few differences in culture, but it's, I never would look back. I love what I did at General Motors. I learned a lot there. And I'm very proud of having worked there, but I think I always had this thing about being able to use those skills that make people buy a car or another car into kind of, building a better world. I know it might sound a bit quaint, as I said, but I feel very lucky I'm able to.
I think, one thing that I've been spending an enormous amount of time on in the last half decade of my life is trying to allow people to understand that success comes in all shapes and sizes. And I think I believe that so much of the world's struggles, and when I say the world's, individual human being struggles, is they've defined success in a materialistic way that they need money and things to prop themselves up, and not their process or mission or just how they enjoy spending their time. And I think I'm very, I sometimes am upset. That would be the word I use, that the thing I love the most is entrepreneurship. Like that at 5 years old, I wanted to shovel snow and sell lemonade. The reason I'm upset is the thing that I love, my process, actually does have financial ramifications against it. Mm-hmm. But if entrepreneurship was destined to be a thing that you could only cap out at 50,000 a year, then I would be very happy. It's funny. It's the reason when all my friends get crazy about paying more taxes, I never get upset and they always get mad at me. And I'm like, I just love this game. If the rules of this game is I pay 99% tax, I would do that because I'm not working hard to buy a boat. I'm working hard because I'd rather do that than ski or surf or sleep or watch TV or anything else in the world. So I actually think it's extremely inspirational when somebody does what they love.
And yeah, I feel lucky, as I said, but I think we don't need to kind of be too radical about that. I mean, you can do a lot of good from where you are. I mean, you create jobs. You anybody in this call listening to this, when they get into an entrepreneurship career, you create wealth in the world. You offer better conditions to your colleagues. You create better products, as I said. I mean, instead of
I'm with you. 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 I think we need everything. To your point, like if you employ one person, a lot of times people think you have to build a huge business to help all the nice things you just said. Anyway, nonetheless, because I'll get stuck into this vortex the whole time.
I'm loving it.
Here's a really big one. As you referenced earlier, we've had the luxury of working with you specifically in our UK office, and it's expanding a little bit. And something that grabbed me right away with you and your team, that I have been very aggressive with the nonprofit boards I sit on to tell them that guilt is not a marketing strategy for nonprofits. And it is such an easy place to go, and especially, Unicef. I mean, you've got to be pretty cold-blooded to not care about children that are hurting. So how do you stop the temptation of going to guilt, and what are other triggers that you see? Because I really appreciated that. I remember that meeting when I was a couple of years ago in London. I was ready to make my big point that guilt is not an option. And when you were debriefing, you guys and gals went there before I got to go there. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I really want to work with this organization because of the mission, but because they understand this. Explain that to me.
Well, it's a tough one. And honestly, I mean, the old guard, the people who've been doing this for years will tell you, Jorge, this is about results for children and people. When you put this kind of, we don't do, as you say, but in the past it was used, and some other NGOs are doing it, this kind of guilt-inducing kind of content, people react very strongly. Yes, you have a spike there. And this is about having those children being able to offer them a better life. So this is not only about the brand, etc. The toughest discussion that I keep on having with these colleagues is about that precisely. And what we have been able to do by measuring is to prove that, yes, when you kind of impose yourself on a customer, you may on a partner or a donor, when you are very aggressive, yes, they sign up maybe slightly faster or a lower cost of acquisition, but then your retention is also dropping. We see, and we've been able now to prove that when you engage with those guys on a platform of hope, of being proud of what they're doing, of offering a better life for these children, and kind of wearing out on their sleeve and tell everybody about what they're doing, you have a much longer lifetime value, which is what it's about, right? It's about making people come to you and being proud of what they're achieving with you, because this is not Unicef doing it. It's Unicef doing it with the millions of people that help us around the world. So that is a tough discussion. The other guys were not wrong. They wanted to offer a better life for the children right now. We have seen, and we can prove, it's a tough discussion, but we can prove that, again, the message of hope, the message that it is getting done. We have COVID now, we got out of COVID. the thing that really gets me going, I'm sorry if I'm getting a bit long.
No, please.
This is the first time in human history, we've been around for what, 500,000 years. This is the first time, this cohort, which is alive now, it's the first time we have the possibility to be done with children not having a school, children dying of preventable causes, children going hungry. This can be done. So that's what we need to kind of find a way, and that's why we're excited working with you and your colleagues. Find a way that people want to be part of that rather than feel guilted into it. You see what I mean? It's the first time in history. We can be done. We can get it done. And there'll be other things to do later. But it's actually quite exciting. And yes, COVID is throwing a big spanner on the wheels, but we'll get over that as well. That's what keeps us going. And that's
talk to me about relevance. I think, I've become more, I've always used context, but I believe that now I tend to use the word relevance more. I awaken to a lot of things that are tried and true about marketing and communication. I come from the streets of it, so it comes natural to me. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm just talking about relevance. When I think of something as iconic as Unicef, what it absolutely needs is relevance, because it can feel very much to the 29 to 42-year-old that can make an impact on the world. It can very much in their brain feel like something their grandma cared about years and years ago. And like, why should, is that the best place? And by the way, I sit on 2 nonprofits, Pencils of Promise, Charity Water. They are very progressive, young, so to me, I started VaynerMedia to rejuvenize historic and iconic brands. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, the Unicef opportunity has been really fun for me. How do you think about relevance, and how important do you feel that is for the Unicef brand, given the iconic nature? And what are some of the actions and steps you're taking to keep it relevant?
Well, we have a bit of an issue, as you know. I mean, we've been around for 70 years, and yes, we have an incredible following. We have 5 million people who give us money every month. That's the best way to help, because my colleagues every month, 5 million. That's people. Incredible. It's incredible. Jeez. And giving regularly is one of the is the best way to help, because my colleagues, the real heroes, the guys in South Sudan, building a school system there, they need to know that they're not building it and shutting it up the next year. So they need to count on that coming. But 5 million is great. But then you look at there's 2 billion people in the world that can give at that level. We're talking $15, $20 a month. We're not talking, if some people give much more, of course. But 5 million people is great. We're probably the biggest in the world in our kind of competitors. They don't like me calling them competitors, but anyway, comparators. And it's still 5 million out of 2 billion. So think about it when you're in the car industry. So we know we have some traction, quite a bit of traction with some subsets of the audience, right? People with an internationalist mind, who follow, international issues, 45 to 65. We're not really there with the youngest crowd. And that's what we're trying to do with you guys. We know when we approach them, we get a very good reaction. The problem is that our channels, the things we've been doing for years, are not really working for them anymore. So that's why we need to change the way we work and how we can, reach out, be relevant for those people.
I love it. You've got 1 minute. What did we not touch on? Anything, any parting message or thought for anybody?
Well, we really want to, I think that's the thing. How we go from 5 million to 50 million, and how can we get everybody excited and happy and proud of being part of this defining thing, course of our days. We are an industry, and because you work in it, because people don't want to take too much risk with somebody else's money when we do fundraising. So we go for the well-tested, but this is preventing us from kind of jumping. So we're excited about, and I'm looking forward to hearing from other panelists as well, and in future engagements. How can we engage with companies and experts so that we can have that kind of jump from 5 to 15 and then 50 million people who want to be part of this? That's what I want.
Understood. No problem. That's not the sorry. That's the best part of the whole 15 minutes. All right, my friend, we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Marissa Thalberg, the Executive Vice President and Chief Brand and Marketing Officer at Lowe's. Marissa is responsible for leading the marketing organization and innovating on new ways to inspire and engage customers. Marissa is a globally recognized, award-winning business strategist and brand-building innovator, known for inspiring teams to take brands to new heights of cultural relevance and business performance. Welcome, Marissa.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Marissa. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Let's paint a little bit of context for everybody listening, a little bit maybe about your personal journey in becoming this really, I mean, for everybody's watching, because I know there's a lot of pockets, I've referenced it 10 times in this episode. This is a real powerhouse in our world, so I'm really excited you're here. So maybe a little context of your journey.
Sure. I mean, I think you have this idea when you're young that it's going to be a straight line, and mine has been anything but, and it's interesting to sort of be at this point as if it was all meant to be. It didn't feel that way at all. I mean, first of all, I never even saw myself as decidedly going into business. I was always more of a creative, did the performing arts in high school, wanted to go into broadcast journalism, actually did that for a little bit. Started my career in advertising. But I think what I found early on in taking some interesting left turns and veering around a little bit was that there was, sometimes people are quick to see the dissimilarities between things you do when they're different. And I always find it more interesting to find the common thread. So when I jumped from advertising to try out broadcast journalism, people were like, well, what are you doing as a producer here? We've been doing this for years. And I was like, well, I kind of learned in advertising how to think about audiences and tell stories. And I think that's what I'm doing here too. So it's kind of the same. You just have to teach me the technical language. And I realize without that having been so overt, that that's probably helped shape my ability to then have a career in beauty, to then suddenly become a leader of digital marketing in beauty, to go to become the CMO of Taco Bell, and now become the CMO of Lowe's. It's not completely expected turns, but I mean, that's what makes life interesting and intellectually stimulating. And when you compare your fresh perspective with people that do have the longevity and institutional knowledge, it can be quite a really great alchemy.
What about the earliest parts of your career? Like when you were in high school and after that, and then, I'm going a little top of the head here. You did spend real time in agency land too, right? Like that was a little bit of the...
That's how I started my career for several years.
Was that a good training ground? Did you realize there very quickly, like, even though I've been doing this for 11 years, I realized on day one, being on the client service side is way less fun than being on the brand side. What were some of the kind of, in those early days at those shops, was there something that was a real big lesson?
Well, I think that back then, and it was a while ago, the whole strategic plan or account planning function hadn't really come over from Europe yet. So being in account management, even now I realize at a very young age, I was doing some really rich central strategic work in terms of how to set up like portfolio equity across Clairol and its respective sub-brands. And I mean, I was like 25 and I was doing that. So in that sense, it was excellent. And I went through their management training programs, and I ran their management training program, first at Saatchi, then at J. Walter Thompson, the two agencies where I spent those early days. So yes, I think I got incredible. I also worked on some real blue chip packaged goods businesses, and it was great. I struggled even then with the idea that I was working in a career and in a company where people were called creatives, and I wasn't one of them. So I was sort of having a very angsty, existential kind of like you do in your 20s. Who am I? What does this mean? How can I be both? Why can't I be both? But I also realized I did want to orchestrate the whole thing. I didn't just want to be feeding a part in. But it was, for me, it was really the creativity that's been the driver, less so the traditional business school route. And I think that just shows that you can defy conventions and expectations more so today than perhaps before, if you're a good learner and a good energized participant and leader and have vision, and you bring that forward. And then part of, I think, was also always molding jobs to be more what I wanted them to be somehow. And very much in service to what the business needs, or what, so that doesn't sound completely self-absorbed. I mean, but it was seeing the opportunity and seeing my strengths and changing how I contributed to actually maximize my contribution is, I think, what I mean to say there. Paying attention to culture, something that's come up in some of our jams through the years. Oh yeah.
How do you see that statement in the macro for everybody listening? And B, how has that changed, accelerated, declined, different in this COVID landscape?
I mean, it's one of my, I think it's where I gravitate as a leader, but I've had this observation from the earliest days of my career, and to this day, it's still what I love about being a marketer is I can't think of any other career that does sit more at this intersection of business, psychology, and culture. You know, and I think if you pull any one of those dimensions away, you're not really fully doing the job. So that culture leg of the stool is enormously important because brands and the products and services that are sold underneath them are a part of the fabric of culture, and understanding how to authentically, and I know that word feels really overused right now, but authentically, or you were saying with relevance, either participate in culture, or if you have a big brand, you might even be driving culture in a certain way, and doing that in a way that doesn't create the blowback factor of no way, you're trying too hard. That's the art of how to move and play. And I love that part of it because I do think that's so vital in terms of breaking through just, you know, the conventions of advertising, so to speak, and allowing a brand to sit somewhere in consumers' brains and of course in their hearts, and just in a larger than life way, and start to shape and reshape what the meaning of those brands are in context. And of course, this year has certainly proved an exercise in that more than anything else.
That's for sure. Before you get out of here, I definitely want to get into Executive Moms because I think it's such an important initiative, and I think a lot of people would love to hear about it. And I don't want to get too caught up in all the nerdy marketing stuff that I want to talk about. So
you can do both. I'll talk fast.
Good. So let's get a couple things in, but I really want to give you the opportunity to talk about that because I think it's really important.
Well, you know, I don't see myself as a natural entrepreneur. That's the funny part. I always admire people who are. I think what I realized over the years is I'm a really good entrepreneur. So I have an entrepreneurial spirit, but I like building it with context. And so the Executive Moms goes back to, and think about this, pre-social media, everyone. And I became a mom for the first time at the very end of 2000 in New York, freezing cold winter, like was so excited, but so overwhelmed, was the head of global advertising at Unilever Cosmetics International then. So very plugged into like the magazine world, the media world, and was saying, where are the working moms? Well, like I need, where can I connect? Figuring, you know, the editor or publisher of Parents Magazine or someone would know. And everyone across the board was like, we don't know why this doesn't exist. Maybe you should go start it. And so there was a little bit of this accidentally falling into solving my own new working mom issues by giving myself a second career. Very dubious decision there. But you know, as a marketer, I think you guys will appreciate that the name and the idea came to me right away, because the only other paradigm out there was Working Mother magazine. And I didn't feel that didn't sound like me. It sounded a little sad. Like I was like an executive, which is sort of serious and important, but that was a mom, which is warm and friendly. And I wanted to be both. And I wanted that dichotomy to live, you know, I thought that dichotomy was interesting. And so the brand I knew right away, but suddenly I founded this organization. And you know what's funny is I knew I wanted it to be content, events, and community. And it just shows timing is everything, because a lot of people told me, oh no, you should go make it a magazine. And it's like, I don't think this is a magazine. So I was doing a daily email called Executive Memorandum, and we were having these big events. And I'll tell you something, I found myself in the center of the conversation around working mothers and an early social media influencer. So my Twitter handle is still Executive Moms. And it was fascinating because unlike most, and then this whole mom blogger thing happened. I'm like, well, I'm not one of those. I'm not a mom blogger. So it's funny how things got very niched. But what I was a multidimensional woman who, and I was thinking about things, not to say I was so ahead of my time, but maybe I was a little bit, because the idea of curating content, like no one said that then, but that's what it was for me, is I felt no one was curating for me as this, you know, and this is an oxymoron on purpose, this giant niche of women like me who worked, had careers, and were also parents. And I wanted to be talked to. First of all, I didn't want to be talked down to, and I wanted to be talked to as a whole person. And then I wanted human connection. So it was very fundamental. It's just nothing like that existed, and I had to go start it. And I did this. I ran Executive Moms very actively on top of my corporate career and on top, of course, being a mom now 2 times over for 13, 14 years. And now it's sort of there, but it's frankly a little dormant. The website's there, the handle's still there, I learned a lot in the process.
Have you thought about recruiting somebody to really, I always think, it's funny. I was going to ask you about this part because I did a little homework. Like, I've learned through the years of those moments where, like, I'm very okay with things to ebb and flow. To your point, It's not a straight line. Has there been any thought of the recruitment of somebody who's in the same place that you were 12 or 13 years ago that kind of wants to, maybe there's a program where like people sign up for 18 months of being like the queen bee, and then like might be something to think about. I'm happy to help if you want.
Yeah, it needs that. It does. Like this garden, like I just haven't tended this
I totally get it
as well.
What's
but
great about gardens though is when they're established, when tended to, they can be quite beautiful.
I agree. And like anything else, when you do it for the right reasons, I wasn't looking to go be a media conglomerate called Executive Moms. I made enough money through sponsors that mostly came to me to cover the expenses, but I realized it was my labor of love. And when you do things out of that reason, you do get paid in different ways. The connections I made, the relationships, and also it allowed me to have this other thing that I wasn't necessarily fixated on monetizing, right or wrong. And maybe that could have been a path, but you make your choices and then you own your choices. And what I loved about it is I found a voice of something that I really, really cared about. And fast forward, here I am at Lowe's, and I was just before this, working on a speech for our women's leadership conference that we're having, and thinking about everything I've learned over the years about being a woman in business and being a mom in business, and so many media stereotypes that I've sought to debunk and research we did at the time. And, I think the insights are real, and frankly, in some ways more important now than ever, because there's a lot of new research coming out that women and moms in particular are being disproportionately set back because of COVID, and the challenges of working from home, childcare and school being disrupted, it's disproportionate. So, the agenda has probably been set back a little bit. And listen, as a manager of a large team myself, it's very hard to know how to help everyone while still doing right by the business. But I think it at least starts with empathy and showing that you care, and then trying to adapt. We're all trying to adapt.
For sure. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
You're welcome.
Our next guest is Beth Weisenberger, co-founder and president of the Handel Group, one of the most impactful executive life coaching companies. Beth has personally coached big-time CEOs and athletes to become higher performers and their best and happiest selves. The Handel Group offers not only live coaching, but also a digital platform, Inner You, for professionals, individuals, athletes, and students. Beth knows how to kick ass and make you all the happier for it. Take it from me, and maybe even Gary V. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, Gary. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Beth, how are you? So, Beth, why don't you contextualize the Handel Group for everybody, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Handel Group. So first, it's my younger sister, Lauren Zander, and I co-founded the company. Now, don't get younger. She's my boss. She's the inventor of our method. She's a genius, and I'm a builder. And so 16 years ago, given who we are and how much we care about people, we're like, let's go coach people. And there was no such thing as coaching. We were looked at like weirdos. We are weirdos. And so we were like, all right, let's give it a year and let's see if we can, hit it out of the park. And we did. And so we're the largest. We have over 70 people who work for us. We have a sports division, a life coaching division, the corporate division I run. We have our Inner You. We teach at universities, Yale, Harvard, MIT for 14 years, and the list goes on. So we've made a name for ourselves. And we are executive life coaches every day.
And where were you, actually, I don't know this, and obviously we've gotten to know each other, we're coaching together. Like, where were you in your life cycle when your younger sis said, this is brewing. Like, what were you doing in your life at that point? And how did you think about the concept at the time? Was that like something, you know, in hindsight, my atmosphere in my household led to so much of what I am, but it took me a longer period of time to be like, oh, right, that's why, you know, was it something on the radar all those years ago?
It's actually a wild story. So at the time I was 45 years old, I'm 61 now. And I was married at the time.
By the way, for the record, she 100% said that because she looks so like I even was like, whoa, like you know that was humble brag. Summer, I see you laughing. You know, we all know exactly why you said that. You are fishing for compliments, and you have executed that. But you have executed. Twitter is lighting up with compliments. I know what you were doing there, but keep going.
Yeah, it's to get women to get, hot, and you could be too. So don't be doing no age bullshit. Okay, so 45, married, 2.5-year-old daughter at the time, living in Laguna Beach, and I friggin' wanted out of there. I was the head of sales of a management consulting firm. They were in business 18 years. It was my second year. I produced the highest sales for them in the 18 years they'd ever been there. I was bored. Sorry, Californians, I didn't like Laguna Beach. I'm a New Yorker. And I was like missing people, and I needed a job. And then my sister Lauren got me a job with one of her clients. And after 6 weeks, the woman was like, I don't want to build an empire. She's going to build an empire. I don't want it that big. And so I'm now in New York City with my 2.5-year-old daughter, my husband, he wants to kill me, no job. And I look at my sister and I'm like, listen, the only one I want to work with is you. Let's take you, make you the Oprah of coaching in the world, and let's get this going. And that's what happened.
What was actually always trying to find value for the audience? Obviously, I speak about family business dynamics a lot. Obviously, me hearing you say that sentence, you clearly had the same dynamics that I'm fortunate to have with my 2 siblings, which is you had a loving relationship. For you to be able to say that to your sis, with all that being said, only you, I'm gonna help you make feeling good about that part. What was the biggest challenges actually in the other direction in those first couple of years of finding your footing in this professional relationship with somebody that you obviously loved so much?
You know, it's fun. I'm 11 years younger. So we really we didn't have the same friends. I did not know her friends. I did not know working with her. She was baby Lauren. And, when I saw the genius of her, she coached me in 2 coaching sessions when I was in Laguna Beach, altered my life in 20 minutes. And I'm like, oh my God. And really our dynamic of, I know who she is and I know how to be with her as a leader. Have we had FU fights? We have one a year that gets, like,
how do they normally get fixed? I think I'll tell you where I'm going with this, Beth. I think a lot of people need to hear the stories of how they get fixed because it's individual human dynamics. And sometimes people don't have the humility. People dig in and then things never get fixed. In your situation, this is just one woman's story. In your situation, what's the normal way your once a year blowout gets fixed? What normally happens first?
We have the fight. I hate that she's always right. I don't want to own. It's always about there's something she wants me to own. And so this is perfect for everybody. There's where our coaching takes you. And as Gary can attest, or Andre or any, we're coaching, 49 people and then 900 people just got dropped into our online module, right? And so you can attest the hardest thing for humans is to own what sucks about you, to own your dark side in your cavity. And
accountability.
Right. And if it's really a dark one, like it's one of those cavities where I don't want to own what a mean motherfucker I can be, like I don't want to own that I'm that bitch, right? And it's embarrassing and oh my God, I got caught in it and oh no, I'm not. All I want to do is defend and fight. So Lauren usually points out where I suck. This one I don't want to own and I'm now to her. And it goes that way for however long. My other sister, who's also a coach, will intervene into it. And at some point, I know it's not, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to be that jerk. I really do walk the talk, and it's now time for me to stop being so embarrassed. Yes, I am that girl that has this bad trait, and now let's go deal with it. And so once I'm willing to own whatever she's pointing out to me, I'm fine. So it doesn't take long. And like I said, there's like one a year. I think this year, did we have any this year? Yeah, we had one.
Talk to me about cavities. Use that term. How do the coaches, what should the leaders that are listening right now think about in trying to find cavities? How are those found?
Well, let me put you on the spot. Why don't you tell people what's one of your cavities that we have discovered?
Something I've talked about in my content sparingly, which always gets a huge amount of reactions from the ones that catch it, because it's never the lead, it's usually somewhere deep in a podcast, is I'm a real tough candorist. Like I can shoot, like everyone's, I love Gary Vee, he's no bullshit. And on stage, when I talk about macro, and even to a macro group, it's a piece of cake because it's the observation. I want to fix it. It comes from a good place. On a one-to-one basis, using your terminology of chickens, I don't love to give candorous feedback when it's negative because I hate conflict at that level. I don't like the feeling of delivering bad news, which unfortunately creates vulnerabilities of people being blindsided if they ultimately are no longer in the company.
Exactly. So as you can hear, everyone, so one of the first things that we begin with is your dream. And then let's now see what's in the way of you actually having what you want. Are you walking your talk? Are you living true to your values? Whether it's your values as a mother, whether it's your values as a staff member, whether it's your values as a daughter, etc. And there's plenty of places where we're not living true to our values. Like if you have a value to be healthy and you've gained 15 pounds in COVID, we would call that being a brat, like someone else is running your life. If you avoid certain conversations, we call that a chicken, none of which you're not bad. This is cavities. We have what's great about us and what sucks about us. And where we travel in a very fun and respectful way is over to your pollution to get it out of the way so you can have what you want in your life. You know, like let's raise the bar. So I'm fully in, Vayner, right? And we've got 900 people. We got the top 50-ish getting coached, and you raise the bar of people being able to, own their dark sides, their cavities, and then immediately take an action that alters it all. Like this is not like you get off the phone and you just had an insight. This is immediate action to alter something for you to be who you want to be.
Totally understood. What about your expansion? What's been the challenges from expanding to a hand-to-hand combat coaching business to obviously the business has gone into creating a tech tool for scalability, for more impact? I spend an enormous amount of time with entrepreneurs and startups that try to make the transition into the tech business after being in some non-tech business, because everyone's realizing how important that is for the next 100 years. What's been the biggest challenges and how's it going? The pandemic made the difference, right? It's for our business, it absolutely did. We've been working from home for 16 years, so we're experts in teaching people how to work from home, right? And then we had just dropped, like, let's call it, I think it's 5 months before Inner You, which is our online coaching program. So 4 months before the pandemic hit, give or take, we had dropped it, and then the pandemic hit and everybody's home. And everybody wants to take care of people. I had a CEO buy 100 for his people in his company, or Gary, you got 900 for your people because people are at home. And this is the time for you to evolve yourself. You've got some space, you've got some time, you've got everybody, your children. We've got, children courses after school. So we're just getting it out in the world and letting people know. So our biggest challenge is branding it out into the world. And that's what we're doing now. And we hired the Sasha Group to help us. Fair enough, which is always a good decision. I know James Orsini just got a big smile. What is actually to step back, because I'm reading the feedback and people are getting a lot of value from the terminology. What are you always most surprised about, Beth, in the process of finding a cavity, carving it out? Like, is it some humans' ability to go into accountability quickly, and oh my God, if they've been dealing with this vulnerability for 16 years, and look how easy it was for them to be like you would think somebody who's got a cavity for 16 years is gonna fight like hell to not be accountable, but then the framework puts them in accountability, they do it, and it's like, da-da-da. Is it people's ability to revert back to bad behavior? Why don't you give like 3 to 6 observations, 15 years into this around, this is just general curiosity, I think could help the audience. Common surprises or observations, like things that are just fascinating that you may not know if you're not in it.
One of my favorite things is because our method is really simple, right? If you break it down, it is so simple. And so to be able to have a 55-minute coaching session with someone who at the end of that call just took an area where they haven't been living true to their values, which we call personal integrity, and now they have the exact framework, they've got the cavity, they've got the promise and the consequence, and that life is now altered, never the same. So if I get on the phone with any one of my clients in Vayner, is like, they're now exercising, they're now, with their children. I have people dealing with like, how you don't spend time with your children? I know, so we take everything where you are not living true to your values, and immediately in that one session, you've now got 3 promises with consequences that if you follow, or if you don't, you have to pay the consequence and we hold you to account, that have now altered your life on a dime. And it always makes me so giddy and happy to be able to then get on my next session with someone and they're like, oh my God, I lost the 4 pounds. Oh my God, my wife is so happy. I'm hanging with the kids. Oh my God. And like, it was like one conversation. It was chicken brat weather reporter. You got a promise, you got a consequence. That's that. Now, it goes way deeper. So everyone who's listening, it's way deeper. We got a lot of content, but that's like the first 2 sessions. And in life altering, and each time it just makes me so happy because people are so freed up, right? To be able to, like, there's someone who I coached who was a chicken about talking to you. They had the conversation with you. They were so happy and freed up. Makes such a difference in one simple conversation with the promise and consequence, just like you made yesterday.
Yep, 100%. We've got 2 minutes. What do you want to get across for everybody who's listening?
For those of you any of you who want more information, just text Beth to 528-55 and we'll take care of you and answer all your questions.
I like that. I like the text tool. Say that one more time to make sure everybody caught it.
Text Beth to 528-55. And you can learn about all the different things that we have, or go on our website. There's newsletters, there's free stuff, there's community calls, there's speed coaching, where we deeply care. Our 2 taglines are learn to human better. And we believe to human is a verb. And the other has a curse word, and Gary knows I like to curse. Unfuck your future self.
I love it. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Beth. Our last guest is Diana Haussling, the Director of eCommerce Marketing for the Campbell Soup Company. Diana is a bold leader in e-commerce, marketing and sales, known for transformative thinking and fresh perspectives. Utilizing her deep expertise, she has driven performance at 3 Fortune 400 companies, leveraging data and consumer insights to engage consumers, fuel brand connection, and significantly increase sales. Welcome, Diana.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Hi, Diana. How are you?
I'm doing awesome.
Good. Like I've been doing for everybody else. Why don't we spend the first 5 minutes contextualizing your journey and your career, and then we'll get into some stuff.
Yeah, I have a very unconventional CPG background. I've worked for 3 big CPG organizations, love them both. I love all 3. Campbell's right now being my favorite. I have a really, I got to keep the paychecks coming.
I hear you.
I started off really grounding myself in a strong sales background. So really understanding that retailer mindset, the retail environment, in both out in the field, building cases, selling things, boots on the ground, from direct selling. And then I really took, a very focused effort on making sure I was getting a breadth of experience that allowed me to get a unique, differentiated background. I reload 8 times. I worked on channels that were in the past up and coming, where there was little data and it required an entrepreneurial spirit. These were the scrappy channels, so not a lot of people were looking, so you got to do a lot of really cool, fun things. I cut my teeth in shopper marketing and marketing to really understand not only the retailer's point of view, but to translate brands' perspectives and what they wanted to do into a retailer environment. So how do we get to those win-win solutions? Right now, I'm in a role at Campbell's where I lead the e-commerce function. I also lead shopper marketing and consumer promotions. It's a really exciting time to be in the e-commerce space right now with all of the growth. But with all that growth comes a lot of visibility and a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yes, AKA 5 seconds ago, pre-COVID, nobody was really paying attention. And then 2 seconds later, everybody's eyes are on it, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Was that a tough transition? How long have you been at Campbell's?
I've been at Campbell's for 8 years.
And how long in this function on e-commerce?
So I've touched e-commerce in varying roles, but in this specific role, it's been a year. So it went from, I was trying to work my way into getting meetings on people's calendar to now everybody wants an update on e-commerce at every level.
Right. And you obviously have the advantage of being in the building for an 8-year period, obviously, because I'm also very fond of your CEO, Mark Clausen. I've worked with him in other places. A new CEO comes in and you've got this role and you probably want to build it out and get it kind of set up the way you want. And then boom, it's prime time. It's almost like building a Broadway play, but then having to move up opening night by 6 months.
Exactly. The acceleration, it has been, it's been crazy, but it's also been exhilarating because, we've actually been able to make a lot of tractions in areas that are important to us. But it's also, as you look around, things are happening now and you want to be able to jump on these opportunities as they go. But it's a big shift. Campbell's and most big CPG organizations are. So it does take a lot of muscle to shift it and really be able to take advantage of this type of space.
And to take it even further back, your first CPG job was in shop. Like, how did that happen? Were you in school? Did you always want to do that? Was it completely random? Just again, for some of the people that are listening
I interned with Hershey. I started interning there in retail and I just asked them if I could stay on and I never left. And really those retail roles, what I love about them, they're probably some of the roles that folks don't think are the most prestigious, but you're literally in the stores, you're selling displays, you're selling your product and your brand, you're understanding what's working, what's not working. I had the best advice from a director that I had, and he basically was like, you will never sell in a bad product. You will never launch a crappy item as a marketer because you know what it's like to have to be in a back room trying to get rid of that product. So it does make you stronger, and those experiences are really help, set me up for this type of role, which requires you to really understand the brick and mortar space, understand how consumers and shoppers think, but also that retailer thought process and what's going to motivate them to elevate your brands.
I like that. What about the transition from traditional to non-traditional for, let's go nerdy within the CPG landscape? You're going to have a lot of people here in the next 24 to 36 months go from being, a brand manager, very kind of classic B school, this is how you do it, to some of these new functions, especially ironically in your category of e-commerce. What's your recommendation? What's the watch outs? What's the things that they need to be considering?
Yeah, I think for CPG as a whole, talent profiles are really going to have to be reinvented and reevaluated. In the past, it's very much so you were a salesperson, you did your sales track and you went up the ladder, and maybe one day you were the SVP of sales. You were the marketer, you did your marketing track. Maybe you did one stint in sales and that was it. You checked that box and you became the CMO. Now this notion of a hybrid model is really going to have to come to fruition. We're really going to have to think about how we design teams, because when you're in the e-commerce space, it's really about being collaborative, but you have to understand a little of marketing. You have to understand some retail media. You have to have experienced not only different channels and functions, but different categories. And that's going to be the challenge for a lot of folks that are coming up now. Those traditional career paths are not going to be what makes you successful in e-commerce. And you're really going to have to rethink, you know, how you approach your career in the long term if you want to be able to be successful in this space.
How do you think these big organizations, you know, so what you're speaking about really rings true for me because it is really talking entrepreneurial nuances. How have you seen, you know, how have you seen entrepreneurial tendencies actually become palpable in these big organizations? You know, how do these big organizations become more entrepreneurial? Like, what's your kind of take on that? Like finding the balance of being corporate and using the strengths of that scale and all those things, but also creating a little bit more of a spirit of, you know, the report's not going to tell us what's going to happen. And oh, by the way, like all these reports that everybody lives by, they're pretty flawed when you look at the reality of what's actually happening in true sales. What are you seeing as somebody who's had that purview probably the majority of her career, and how is that manifesting right now in the current state of the CPG Fortune 500 landscape?
Yeah, you see the pendulum shift. I mean, there was a period of time, you know, a couple of years ago when e-commerce was the it thing in CPG again, and you saw a lot of companies bring in these hotshot digital gurus with Google glasses and you know, all kinds of sexy e-commerce things. And they did a lot of press, but they didn't make a lot of traction in the organization. And they probably frustrated a lot of their cross-functional teammates because they got a lot of money, they got a lot of attention, but didn't produce a lot of output.
Right. So they weren't grounded in the operational, practical nature of the business. They were good for Ad Age. They were good for a podcast. They were good to give a keynote at South by Southwest, but it was all sizzle, no steak.
Exactly. There was no substance. And that's where first the CPGs have to really think through, what do you want? You know, do you want the sizzle or do you want to actually make progress? And what is it going to take to get there?
Do you believe there's a small group of individuals who have the potential to deliver both for the organization?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm a Black woman in CPG, corporate America, period. I know what it feels like to not really belong in the rooms that, you know I belong in, and to take up space. So there's a balance of pushing the status quo and really getting people to move in the right direction, but bringing them with you and influencing that change. Yeah. I think the difference in this go around now is that there has to be a direct tie to the P&L. There has to be a direct tie with key deliverables and goals that the organization wants to set. And it can't be a moving target. You know, a lot of the CPG organizations set out to say, like, we want to lead in e-commerce, and they brought in the hotshot to help them do that. But that's not the reality of every business model. You know, you really have to think about your brand segmentations and your portfolio roles and make the right choices so that you actually can have wins. There are just some categories and brands where you may want to, you know, just be competitive. And there's some spaces where your brand has a right to lead, and you have to make those smart choices. And then the folks that you bring in into the organization have to be able to actually influence the cross-functional teams that take stuff done, to get stuff done. My best friends at work, IT, production, supply chain, you name it. I've got a best friend in every department because that's how e-commerce functions. You really have to create these collaborative teams, and you're not going to have authority over all the people that you need to get your job done.
No, you will not. And that's where human dynamics and teamwork really matter. Talk to me then about another thing. I don't know how much this hits your radar, but I'd love your perspective of what you've just been saying. If we're going to talk about practicality in operations, I think budgeting has really hurt these companies as somebody who came into this industry 11 years ago, and 98% of people thought I was all sizzle and no steak and have earned my stripes through the years. You know, I've actually thought the reverse. I knew that I was the, talking head from a different industry that people thought was definitely going to be full of shit. But I also knew that what people had forgotten in the Gary V catch up was I built an actual business since I was a child and only think operational, and ironically ended up to a lot of my contemporaries now more practical than them. I just happen to be a little bit out there in my personality of communication. one of the things that has really hurt a lot of my friends on the CPG or big brand side is the rigidness of a budget. And I've had some incredible conversations finally, because COVID's really hurt them, because I'm like, see, you planned all your TV, you planned all your trade, like real life requires the ability to adjust. COVID is the extreme, but oh, by the way, the things I've been yelling about for the last 10 years is every month you were making mistakes because you decided them a million years ago, and the world changed in a micro way, it changed in a macro way now. Your thoughts about the agility around budget?
Yeah, I think, and I've actually been trying to coin agile budgeting at Campbell's to try to get my way in some of these instances. But what I really see is, and this is for a lot of established organization, you know, you live by your 3-year strat plan. You know what your drive periods are, you know what your playbook is, and COVID-19 kind of threw that out the window. So all of those things are what help, you know, traditional long-standing organizations be successful, but they're also counter to how you react, operate, and make the most of opportunities in the e-com space. So the ability to really look at what's working and what's not, and shift your dollars to really feed what's growing and pull away from what's not, that doesn't necessarily exist in some of the constructs that you have in the way that P&Ls and everything is tied specifically back to a brand. So the more and more we can get these traditional organizations, and this is where I'm talking to my finance friends, to come up with some solutions of how, you know, how do you ring fence dollars that are there to shift and take advantage of growth? You know, as we see what, and everything is new. We're encountering categories that are growing that we would never have thought have grown in that space. So they don't have the dollars set aside for that. So how do we pivot quicker? You know, it takes a long time to make decisions in some of these spaces, and then you miss that opportunity. So how do we get our teams to think differently and more fluidly around how we invest in our business and optimize along the way?
Something fun for the last 2 minutes. Anything that you've purchased during COVID as you know, Diana, the consumer, the human, the non-executive, like anything that you've picked up on, that you've bought, that you now realize, oh my God, when we quote unquote go back to normal, I won't be picking this up at Whole Foods or CVS or 7-Eleven or Wegmans or whatever it may be. And then any insights from that of how you became aware of it, or what the experience was like, or why you won't be going back to buying it at a store, but you will buy it on e-commerce?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me, I'm one of the several people that I got a Peloton and I didn't even work out before COVID. But I figured it was something I had to start doing. So, I mean, I think there's just so many different lifestyle shifts that I've made. The biggest shift from a shopping behavior for me is now I no longer do the grocery shopping for my household. So that's like a change. Because we do click and collect, because there's delivery, I no longer do it anymore.
So who's doing it?
It's my husband. So that's—
Does he like it?
He likes the click and collect. He likes to be able to go in and pick it out. I do the selecting at home. He goes and picks it up. So like, that's just, if you think about the dynamic shift and what that means for impulse purchases.
You just took the words out of my mouth. Do you feel like the theme that everyone's hearing is big brands are doing well? Do you think it's because the discovery had a lot to do with shopper marketing or end cap dynamics or private labels or things of that nature? And do you think in this environment, brands really shine?
Yeah, I think brands are shining, but I think more and more it's my needs. So I'm open to more brands, which is scary for me as a manufacturer. Yes, I'm open to more things because I'm not wandering down the aisle. I'm seeing something on Instagram and I'm like, okay, cool. I have the app function open. I'll just add it to my cart. And we talk a lot about getting on the list and the shopping list. Well, the shopping list is ongoing. So at any moment in time, I can basically have my Instacart app open, my Walmart app open, and I can be toggling through all of them, building the list that I want. And I don't even have to go pick it up. And it either comes here or my husband gets it for me. So I think it's the dynamic and how the shopper behavior and how we think about shopping is totally going to change. And who we're talking to, you know, that dynamic in many households has shifted.
I love it. I couldn't appreciate your time more. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Andrea, take us home. I got to run off to my next meeting. So bye, everybody. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks to all of our speakers, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for joining us today. Marketing for the Now is going to take a week off next week, but we'll be back for our last 2 shows of summer on Tuesday, September 22nd from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with an episode dedicated to entrepreneurs and innovation. Join us to hear from serial entrepreneurs, including Mark Laurie, currently the president and CEO of Walmart eCommerce, and founder of Jet.com, Quidsy, Diapers.com, and Soap.com, and Kavita Gupta, the co-founder of FinTech.tv and professor at Stanford University. For past recordings, check out VaynerX.com, and please let us know what you thought about this week's episode at #MarketingForTheNow. Hope to see you in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.